Why LinkedIn left China. Imagine a Western social media platform that managed to do something Facebook and Google had both failed to do before it, actually break into the Chinese market. For years, LinkedIn was praised as a rare example of a Western tech company successfully operating legally in one of the most tightly regulated internet markets in the world. But 9 years later, this seemingly rare success story eventually came to an end too. LinkedIn shut down its social media features in China entirely, and its simplified replacement product ended up closing not long after as well. In this video, we're tracing how LinkedIn tried to navigate one of the hardest paths in global tech business, balancing a company's global principles against China's extremely strict internet censorship demands, and why this balance ultimately proved impossible to sustain forever. LinkedIn launched its Chinese language version in 2014. Unlike Facebook and Google, which had previously failed to break into the Chinese market, LinkedIn managed to enter by partnering with local firms and agreeing to censor content in line with the country's extremely strict internet laws. This was a fairly different approach compared to most other Western tech companies. Instead of flatly refusing to operate under China's censorship rules, a stance that ultimately got Facebook and Google pushed out of this market, LinkedIn chose to compromise, hoping to maintain a presence in one of the largest professional markets in the world. For a while, this compromise strategy appeared to work. LinkedIn managed to operate legally in China for years, something other Western social media competitors had failed to achieve. To operate legally, LinkedIn had to comply with content removal requests from the Chinese government. A transparency report released in 2022 showed that the company received 43 content removal requests from Beijing in 2021 alone, and complied with 42 of them. This figure shows an extremely high compliance rate. Nearly every content removal request received was actually carried out by LinkedIn. This is a real picture of the compromise they had to make to keep operating in this market, handing over most of the control over what content could and couldn't appear on their platform to local government regulators. What made this situation even more complex was that the impact of this censorship turned out not to be limited to users inside China alone. In 2021, an Oxford doctoral student received a notification that his LinkedIn account had been blocked in China over content deemed prohibited. It was later reported that the reason for this block was because his profile mentioned the term Tiananmen Square massacre. This is an extremely concerning example of how a country's censorship policy can impact international users who aren't even located in that country. LinkedIn also blocked Chinese users from viewing the accounts of several U.S. journalists who had written about sensitive topics. This platform's censorship swept up foreign academics, researchers, and journalists throughout the summer of 2021, systematically screening out any mention of keywords regulators deemed sensitive. Regulatory pressure on LinkedIn then escalated extremely quickly. In March 2021, LinkedIn was forced to temporarily halt new member signups in China in order to conduct a compliance review against local regulations. In May of that same year, Microsoft, LinkedIn's parent company, was publicly named by Chinese regulators, alongside 105 other Chinese companies, over allegations of improper data collection on both the LinkedIn and Bing platforms. Just imagine the pressure Microsoft faced at this point, not only dealing with mounting content censorship demands, but also facing direct regulatory scrutiny over their data collection practices. These were two separate fronts of pressure, both signaling that LinkedIn's room to maneuver in this market was narrowing over time. On October 14, 2021, Microsoft-owned LinkedIn announced it would shut down its social media service in China entirely. They cited a significantly more challenging operating environment as the reason behind this decision. This marked the end of this platform's social features in China, 7 years after first entering the country back in 2014. For a company previously praised as a rare success story among Western tech companies in China, this was a fairly significant admission that the compromise model they had run for years was no longer sustainable. As a replacement, LinkedIn launched a far more simplified product called InCareer in December 2021. This new product was essentially a completely stripped-down job board. No social feed, no content sharing features, and no news articles. This extremely minimalist design was specifically built to be easier to comply with China's censorship rules, by removing nearly every feature that could potentially become a source of regulatory content trouble. This was a fairly pragmatic effort. Instead of fully exiting the Chinese market, LinkedIn tried to maintain a presence by minimizing regulatory risk as much as possible, even if that meant sacrificing nearly every feature that made LinkedIn in other markets around the world. Interestingly, even before this shutdown of social features happened, LinkedIn was actually already a fairly minor player in the Chinese market. They only had around 800,000 monthly active users, compared to homegrown professional network MyMy, which claimed 7 million users. That's an extremely large gap, nearly 9 times smaller than their main local competitor. This shows that even though LinkedIn technically managed to survive in the Chinese market longer than other Western competitors, they had actually never truly succeeded in building a significant user base in this market from the very start. Unfortunately, InCareer also failed to close this gap. By March 2023, this product only had 959,600 monthly active users, a figure far behind local competitors. By comparison, 51job had 18.5 million monthly active users, Boss Jeepin had 17.3 million, and Leapin had 6.7 million. Just imagine the scale of this gap. Even the smallest local competitor on this list, Leapin, still had almost 7 times more users than InCareer. These numbers make it extremely clear that this simplified version strategy failed to attract significant market interest, even though it had been specifically designed to more easily comply with local regulations. On May 8, 2023, LinkedIn CEO Ryan Roslansky announced 716 global job cuts, about 3.5% of the company's roughly 19,000 employees. These cuts directly resulted in the closure of LinkedIn's China product and engineering teams. They cited fierce competition and a challenging macroeconomic climate as the reason behind this decision. This was a fairly clear signal that the company had reached a point where maintaining operations in China no longer made business sense, regardless of their earlier efforts to adapt to local regulations. InCareer officially shut down completely on August 9, 2023. LinkedIn then pivoted their remaining China strategy toward cross-border hiring instead, rather than continuing to try to maintain a direct consumer presence in China's domestic market. This closed the book on 9 years of a Western social platform trying to thread the needle between global principles and China's censorship demands. One Beijing business owner offered a comment that fairly concisely summed up this whole situation, that just like Google before it, LinkedIn's exit was ultimately the result of China's internet content censorship policy. So, what's the big lesson we can take from LinkedIn's 9-year journey in China? This story is different from most other international business failure cases we've covered before. It's not about a marketing strategy mistake, not about a failure to understand local consumer preferences, and not about a supply chain operational error. This is a story about how a company tried to navigate an extremely fundamental tension between a platform's global principles of free information sharing and expression and the regulatory demands of a country that enforces strict control over internet content. LinkedIn initially managed to find a middle path that let them operate longer than other Western competitors by being willing to compromise significantly on content censorship. But this compromise ultimately still wasn't enough to sustain their long-term operations, as regulatory demands kept increasing, while their own user base never truly grew significantly compared to local competitors. This story serves as a reminder that some markets carry challenges far more fundamental than just business strategy alone. Challenges rooted in fundamental differences over how information and content should be governed, something that can't always be solved simply through compromise and product adaptation. If you enjoy global tech business case studies like this, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss other case studies on global business successes and failures. See you in the next video.